What's up guys? Welcome back to the channel and to another video. This week's video will be all about this right here. So this is the Festool DF700 Domino. I've been wanting this for a while and I finally broke down and got one. So I'll give you a couple reasons as to why I bought this at the end of the video. But in this week's video, we'll take a look at a brief overview, some of the features of this thing. I'll make a couple cuts and I'll explain how the mortises and tenons work together with this thing. And then like I mentioned, I'll also give you a couple reasons as to why I finally got this. So with that said, let's jump into the video and get started. So if you're unfamiliar with the Domino or you've never seen this tool before, here's a quick rundown with how it works. So there's a cutter head inside the main part of the machine, and as you plunge it forward, that cutter head spins and oscillates from side to side, and this cuts out a mortise. There's a ton of different adjustments to set up these mortises, and the machine pretty well does everything, so all you have to do is turn it on and push it forward and the cut is made, which results in a perfectly shaped mortise every single time. After that cut is made, you can put some of these pre-made tenons in the mortises, and just like that, you have mortise and tenon joinery made very easy. So I'll go over some more details in this video, but for now, let's get started with the basics. So here is a first quick look at this thing. So first impressions, it is an absolute beast of a tool. I think it weighs about 25 pounds or so, so it is heavy, definitely well put together, and a very solid machine altogether. So the first thing that you'll need to do after you get this out of the sustainer box is to take the wrench that it comes with and pop this little lever, which will separate this thing into two pieces. So we need to do this in order to put the cutter head on the tool, but first it's shipped with this plastic piece on one of the rods. That'll keep it from plunging forward and keep it into a locked position when it's shipped. So you get a 12mm cutter head with it. This is the 8mm cutter head, and I had already taken it out of the package, so it is packaged better than that whenever you receive it. Anyway, in order to put the cutter head on, it's really simple. You just screw it on at the end. It'll only go so far, and then the piece inside of the domino will begin to turn. So you flip it around, and if you push the green button on the left side of the screen, that'll lock it in place. Now, it's not like the router where you lock it into place and continue with that ratchet action. It's more of a pop in place and go. So the on-off switch is on the back of this thing, and here's what the plunging mechanism looks like. So it plunges forward out the front and the cutter head will make the cut. Now the cool thing about this is it is adjustable at a very precise measurement. So you're seeing here it adjusts anywhere from 15 to 70 millimeters, and that's how far it will plunge outward. So that was the 30. If we move it to 15, you can see it plunges less, and if we move it all the way back to 70 millimeters, you can see how far outward it plunges. So that's how you set the depth of how far this thing will plunge. No surprise here that it comes with a cord for this. One thing I really like about this is that all the Festool tools are interchangeable. They have the same plug-in on the cord. Also, this is a 12-foot cord, so it reaches pretty far. It's regular 110 volt, so you can plug it into the wall. Or if you have one of their dust extractors, you can plug it directly in there. The dust hose snaps right onto the port. And now let's take a look at some of the adjustments. So there's a lever on the left side that allows the fence to go anywhere from 0 to 90 degrees. The cool thing about this is that it has built-in stops at 90, 67.5, 45, 22.5, and 0 degrees. So it's very easy to get those angles that you'll be using pretty frequently. If you wanted to stop at a random angle, say 30 degrees like I have here, you just set the fence to that and then you tighten the lever down, which will keep it at that level. So I put it at 90 degrees, spun it around, and then on the other side there is another level that will control the height of that. So if we go back to the other side, there's another gauge which tells you how many millimeters it is away from the cutter head height wise. An even easier way to measure that is these pre-built in sliding setup blocks. So these work similar to the height adjustment on a router. You can see it's very easy to adjust, and this would be useful for when you have to make repetitive mortises but not necessarily at the same time. So if you have to go back and do something, it'll already be set precisely to that depth. So here's the first cut, and I'll be quiet so you can hear this. And just like that, there is the very first mortise on this. So you can see it's a little high up on the leg. Now this is obviously just a test cut, so it doesn't really matter. But if I move that fence upward and then try to make the cut again, you can see that the mortise will be a little bit further down on this. So that height adjustment works really well, and it's super easy to gauge where you want those to go. So here are some of the 8mm tenons. Now tenons come in different sizes as far as width and length, so we'll see more of that in the end of the video, but for now you can just see how the tenons slide in there. And the fit on these is pretty well absolutely perfect, so I don't think they could have fit any better. Another cool feature of this domino is the ability to make a tight tenon versus a loose tenon. So you can see here, if I flip this switch, the indicator gauge switches over from the small tenon to the big tenon. What this means is that the cutter head will oscillate just a little bit further from side to side, allowing this to be used for loose joinery as well as tight joinery with the tenons. Now this would be practical for something like breadboards, or maybe if you're putting a tabletop together and you're just worried about alignments, these would behave similarly to biscuits. Okay, so at this point we've had a brief overview of what this thing looks like and how it works. So now I'm going to actually make a couple cuts that would be in a real scenario. So we're going to pretend that this is a table leg and this will be a table apron, and I'll attach these two right here. So without the domino you would have to use pocket holes, maybe mortise and tenon or some type of joinery like that. But with this machine we'll put mortises in here and in here. And then these tenons, these are the longer tenons, but these tenons will go in and they'll line up like that. So I'm gonna put 2 tenons in and I'll show you what that'll look like. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So whenever I attach an apron to a leg, I like to leave a little gap on the outside to recess that apron back in. I think it just gives it a better look. So I make a mark kind of approximate somewhere that I want it to be and then measure that. So that was at 30mm, so that's where I'll put the first tenon. So very easily like that, we were able to set the height. But now what about how far you go on the side? So if you look at the top front, you can see the gauge where you could make a mark on that board and then line it up with that. With the domino though, there's an even cooler way to do that. So you'll notice these tabs, and if you push the button, these tabs pop out like their claws on Wolverine, and then you're able to push them back in. So if you leave just one of those tabs out, it can serve as a gauge for how far to move the domino from side to side whenever you're making the cut. Here's what it looks like. So you can see here that it hits the end of the board, and that won't allow me to move it any further. That'll keep it consistently in one place for when I need to make the repetitive cuts between the pieces. So I'm using the 100mm dominoes, and I want about half of the tenon to be in each piece. So I'll set the cutter to 50mm, put it on, slide it over to where that tab hits, and then I can plunge in 50mm with the cutter. So you can see here that it's going in much further than it was in those other cuts because we didn't have it set as deep. Here's a quick look at that first mortise and the tenon going in. I really just can't get over how well these fit and how easy and a perfectly precise cut that it made. So for some additional strength, we're going to cut another mortise right beside that. So that push tab is going to go actually in that mortise. So you can see here, not the best angle, but you can see that the tab fits right down in that first mortise, and that'll line it up and offset it to a perfect amount over on the other mortise that you can see we're cutting here. So just one thing to note while we're making this cut, the domino is incredibly smooth and it is easy to handle. The plunging doesn't require a whole lot of pushing. You let the tool do the work, but the cutting process on this thing is absolutely awesome. So after those mortises are cut, we can dry fit a couple of tenons in there to make sure they fit. And then I took those back out to line up the apron piece and which side I would need to make the cuts on that apron. Now I mentioned earlier that I like to recess the apron off of the leg a little bit, so I'm gonna back the depth gauge up to 20mm. Since the first cut was made at 30 and this is made at 20, that'll give that a 10mm offset in the front. You may have also noticed on that last shot that when I'm doing the apron, I switched the sides of the tabs. So that is because that the apron and the leg are a mirror image of each other whenever you're putting the tenons in. So in this type of situation, you would want to flip that to the other side at the same length. That way they'll line up perfectly, which we'll see here in a couple minutes. So the tabs on the front as well as the stop block for the depth on the left side of this thing are a couple really cool features that make this thing not only super easy to use and measure, but to keep repetitive measurements in the exact same place. So you can use the gauges and the scale on each part of the domino to line it up, but using the stop blocks will keep those in the exact same locations. So if you have to change depth or the side to side distance on each one, rather than trying to measure that and potentially being off by a fraction of a millimeter, which would cause it to not line up, those gauges and the hard stops on this will allow those to line up perfectly every single time, no matter where you're taking the measurement from. So here is a test fit, and you can see that these slide down on there absolutely perfectly. Tap them in place with a hammer, and here's a close look at what it looks like. Just a quick note that any of the gaps you see on the side is because this lumber is not milled up perfectly, so that's because of the lumber, not the cut. All right, so this here would serve as the practical example of something you'd actually build with a leg and with an apron piece. Now, to be completely honest with you, other than those two cuts that you saw me make earlier in the video, this is the first time that I have ever used this tool, and I truly cannot believe how easy it was to make these cuts. Everything lines up absolutely perfectly, and this really couldn't have been easier. So a lot of tools will kind of have a learning curve that you have to get used to and figure out how they work. As long as you understand how this machine works and all the features with those push tabs on the front, there really is no learning curve with this. And I am blown away by how accurate that this thing is. So first impressions with this thing, absolutely awesome, spot on accurate, and I cannot wait to use this thing on future projects. This is going to save me so much time and so much frustration by making similar cuts like this. So as far as efficiency goes, this thing by far should be at the top. So here's a look at the sustainers with all the different tenons in them. Now the reason that I ordered these kits is because the cutters come with them. So for example, this is the 14 and the 12 millimeter kit. Here's the 14 millimeter cutter head right here. The 12 comes with the domino, so you don't need that one. The 10 is here, and the 8 is the one that I already had in the domino. So I'm gonna get some of these tenons out and I'll line them up and organize them so you don't have to watch that part. But let me get some of these out and then we'll take a look at what all we have here. Okay, so here's a look at everything organized out of these sustainers. So this column is the 8 millimeter domino. These are the 10 millimeter dominoes. So you get 6 different kinds of dominoes in this first kit. So these down here are 50 millimeters. These are 80 millimeters. These are 100 millimeters. The same thing on the 10 millimeters. Now the first number refers to the thickness. So this is 8 millimeters thick. To get a better comparison of that, this is the 8 millimeter. This one here is the 14 millimeter. So you can see how much thicker the 14 millimeter domino is in comparison to the 8. So the first number refers to the thickness and the second number refers to the length. So like I said, these are 50, these are 80, and these are 100 millimeters long. Now as far as the length is, everything is actually a couple millimeters short, likely to take into account a little extra space whenever you mark those with the cutter. So all of these are what you get in this first kit, including the cutters. If we move over here, so these are the much bigger dominoes. These would be used for something a lot heavier structural, maybe a table frame or something like that. So these are 12 millimeters by 100, 12 millimeters by 140, and then 14 by 100 and 14 by 140. For reference, 140 millimeters is over 5 inches, so these are absolutely massive tenons. Now off the top of my head, I'm not sure how many pieces you get in each kit, so I'll try to leave that information somewhere right down in here in the video if I can find that, and I'll edit that into the video so you know how many pieces you're getting. Now these are expensive, but you have to remember that you get the cutter heads with these, so in my opinion, this was a good starter kit to get the cutter heads as well as a little bit of everything to get me started really figuring out which pieces I need. All right, so at this point in the video, we've kind of looked at the tool, we've made some cuts, we checked out the tenons, and so now I really wanted to give you a couple reasons as to why I finally bought this thing. So I've got 3 reasons, and they all kind of tie into each other. And the first reason, which you might not expect, is because of the dust collection on this thing. So making the mortises and tenons with this will replace a lot of different ways that I've made them in the past. I've used my router to cut some of the mortises, and I've used a crosscut sled to cut some of the tenons. Now both of those ways do work well, but one problem with those, especially with the tenons on the crosscut sled with the dado blade, is that dust and chips get everywhere with that. Now that does work very well, but when you're finished and there's a ton of dust floating around all over you, all over everything, you know it's floating around in the air, especially some of that fine dust. Well, let's just say that's kind of one of those things that you want to avoid if you can. So on those test cuts that I made with this, the dust collection when it's hooked up to this is absolutely awesome. That's one of the reasons that I really like Festool tools. Now obviously they're great tools, but the dust collection on these tools is absolutely superb. And not only does it keep everything cleaner, but it also keeps some of that fine dust out of the air that you shouldn't be breathing. So reason number 2 as to why I got this is simple: accuracy. This thing is unbelievably accurate from the first test that I did on this. Now, I obviously haven't built a whole lot of pieces with this, so that may change over time. Because I've used some of the other tools of this brand and I know how the quality is, I would not expect the accuracy to be any less over time, but this thing is unbelievably accurate. So if you've tried to do similar joinery with pocket holes or maybe dowels, if you've done it enough, sometimes you'll notice that things can be off by just a little bit, and that can throw your whole project off. If it doesn't stay square, if it's not lined up, not only does that cause some frustration, but it can also make things not turn out the way you want them to. So with all of the features of this thing, making accurate joints and accurate cuts should be absolutely no problem. So reason number 3 as to why I finally selected this is sort of similar to reason number 2. Reason number 3 being efficiency. So like I mentioned earlier, there can be a lot of different ways to make the joint similar to how this tool can make it, with pocket holes, with mortise and tenon, with dowels. The problem with those is sometimes they take forever to make. So for example, if you're a follower of my channel, a couple weeks ago you saw me make a large dining table. Now I used mortise and tenon joinery for the legs and the apron, and that table was rock solid. It turned out awesome. But cutting those mortises and tenons, especially those tenons on the cross cut sled, took forever in comparison to what this thing will do. That factor combined with the fact that if you're off a little degree and it doesn't line up, well, that can lead to a very frustrating day in the shop. So being able to make those accurate cuts that I talked about earlier in a super efficient and super timely manner, well, that was finally the selling point of this thing for me. So if you make a lot of furniture or you're making projects to sell, having one of these will speed up the process a ton. So not only will your results be better, but you'll be able to do a lot more in a lot less time, which obviously is a very important aspect of business. So if you watch a lot of my videos, definitely stay tuned to see me use this frequently in the future. So that'll do it for this video. I hope you found everything in today's video useful. If you like this video, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think. If you have one of these, also drop a comment below. Let me know what you think. If I missed anything, give me some tips. Leave those below in the comments. So as always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And of course, stay tuned for more.